In the fall of the year 2000, three men from California flew to Dallas, Texas, to sell their company. Reed Hastings, Mark Randolph, and Barry McCarthy walked into the headquarters of Blockbuster Video, the largest video rental empire on the planet, and sat down across from CEO John Antioco and General Counsel Ed Stead. Netflix was burning through cash. It had fewer than 300,000 subscribers. It was losing roughly $50 million a year. Hastings made his pitch. Blockbuster would buy Netflix for $50 million, and Netflix would run the online side of the combined business, while Blockbuster kept its 9,000 stores. $50 million. That was less than what Blockbuster collected in late fees in a single quarter. According to Mark Randolph's memoir, written years later, Antioco's face changed as the number landed. An odd expression, the corner of his mouth turning upward. He was, in Randolph's words, struggling not to laugh. Blockbuster passed without making a counteroffer, and the Netflix team made a long, quiet ride back to the airport. The company that suppressed a laugh that afternoon was worth $5 billion. Today, it is gone. The company that was laughed at is worth over $300 billion. This is how that happened. You are watching Empire Circuit, where we take apart the companies that built the electronic world, down to the circuit board and the engineer who designed it. This is the story of a video rental empire that had 9,000 stores, 84,000 employees, and the chance to own its only real competitor for pocket change. If that sounds like your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because the collapse here was entirely self-inflicted. Before there was a blue and yellow ticket stub on every strip mall in America, there was a software engineer in Texas watching his industry fall apart. David Cook had built a company called Cook Data Services in 1982, writing database software for the oil and gas industry. It was a good business while oil prices held. Then they did not hold. The Texas oil bust gutted his client base and his revenue along with it, and Cook needed a new market for the skills he had spent years building. His wife Sandy gave him the answer. She was a film enthusiast, and she had noticed something about the video rental shops around Dallas. They were small. They were disorganized. They carried a few hundred titles at best, crammed into converted storefronts, with handwritten inventory logs, and no system for tracking what was rented, what was returned, and what was sitting on a shelf unwatched. The distributors charged about $70 per tape, which meant a store owner who guessed wrong about what customers wanted was out $70 with no way to recover it. Cook looked at that mess and saw a database problem. Not a retail problem, not an entertainment problem, but a problem of information. Knowing which titles moved in which neighborhoods, which genres rented on which nights, which tapes were overdue, and which were dead inventory. He had spent 3 years building software that tracked oil deposits underground. Tracking 8,000 VHS tapes on a shelf was simpler math. What he needed was a store large enough to prove it, and in the fall of 1985, he built one. On October 19, 1985, the first Blockbuster Video opened in Dallas, Texas. It carried 8,000 tapes, covering 6,500 titles, a selection that dwarfed every other rental shop in the city. The tapes were displayed on shelves, like books in a bookstore, face out, organized by genre, with a dedicated new releases wall near the entrance. Each tape had a magnetic security strip and a barcode. The checkout counter used laser scanning, no handwritten logs, no guesswork. Cook's database tracked every rental in real time, feeding data back into purchasing decisions, so the store stocked more of what moved and less of what gathered dust. 3 more stores followed in 1986. Revenue hit $7.4 million that year. The model worked. Customers drove past the mom-and-pop shops to reach the Blockbuster because it had the movie they wanted. It was open late, and it did not feel like someone's converted garage. Cook had proved that Americans would change their Friday night habits for a big, clean, well-lit store with a deep catalog and a fast register. But Cook was a software engineer, not a chain operator. To turn 4 stores into 4,000, Blockbuster needed a different kind of builder. In February of 1987, one walked through the door. Wayne Huizenga had made his fortune in garbage. He had built Waste Management into the largest waste disposal company in America through the same method he would now apply to video rental. Buy the competition, absorb their territory, consolidate overhead, repeat. In February 1987, Huizenga and two associates from his waste management days, John Melk and Donald Flynn, purchased a third of Blockbuster for $18.6 million. By April, David Cook was out. The man who had designed the computerized inventory system that made the whole thing possible departed with his shares and vanished from the story. Huizenga got the empire. Cook got a buyout. The pace of what followed was staggering. Huizenga acquired Movies to Go for $14.5 million. He acquired Major Video for $92.5 million. At peak expansion, Blockbuster was opening a new store every 24 hours. By the end of 1988, there were 415 locations. By 1991, system-wide sales reached $1.5 billion. A planned IPO in 1986 had been canceled after a financial columnist published a damaging article questioning Cook's background. But Huizenga did not need the public market yet. He had momentum, and momentum was worth more than a ticker symbol when you were doubling your store count every 12 months. But Huizenga was already looking for the exit. He had built the empire the same way he had built the garbage business. Now he needed a buyer big enough to write a check that started with a B. In 1994, Viacom acquired Blockbuster for $8.4 billion. The purchase helped finance Viacom's bid for Paramount, and Blockbuster, with over 3,400 stores worldwide, was printing money. The logic made sense on paper. In practice, Viacom had just paid the highest price ever offered for the world's best answer to a question the world was about to stop asking. John Antioco became CEO of Blockbuster in 1997 and inherited the machine at its operational peak. He was a retail veteran, sharp and experienced, capable of reading a balance sheet with surgical precision. The number that defined his company was this. In the year 2000, Blockbuster generated roughly $800 million in late fees alone. That represented 16% of total revenue. $800 million from customers returning tapes and DVDs a day or two past the due date. It was the most profitable line item in the entire business. It required no inventory, no shelf space, no extra employees, just a clock and a receipt. And it was the thing that would destroy them, because every one of those $800 million represented a customer who resented paying it. Every late fee was a small, accumulating grudge, a reason to switch to any competitor that promised it would never charge one. In 1997, the year Antioco took over Blockbuster, two men in Scotts Valley, California, founded exactly that competitor. Their company was called Netflix. Keep the disc as long as you want. No due dates, no penalties, no Friday night drive to the strip mall and back. The weapon aimed at Blockbuster's most profitable product was built from the resentment that product created. Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph launched Netflix in 1997 as a DVD by mail service. The model was modest. You ordered a disc on the website, it arrived in a red envelope, you mailed it back when you finished. No stores, no shelves, no late fees. The selection was theoretically unlimited because there were no walls to fill. The story often told is that Hastings founded Netflix after being charged a $40 late fee for a copy of Apollo 13 at his local video store. The documented record is thinner. Randolph has said the company grew out of conversations during their shared commute, and that the late fee origin story was a simplified pitch that stuck. The most famous founding myth in streaming history may be exactly that, a myth polished into a parable. What is not disputed is what they built, or what happened in that Dallas conference room in the year 2000. The meeting has already been told. What happened afterward has not. Blockbuster, looking for its own path into digital, signed a 20-year streaming partnership with Enron in July of 2000. Enron would supply the broadband infrastructure. Blockbuster would supply the content. The deal was announced to applause. 18 months later, Enron collapsed in the largest corporate fraud in American history, and the streaming partnership went down with it. Netflix, meanwhile, went public in 2002. The company that had been losing $57 million a year reported its first annual profit, $6.5 million, by 2003. The numbers were small. The trajectory was not. Antioco noticed. And what he did next is the part of this story that almost nobody tells. At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster reported annual revenue of $5.9 billion. It operated 9,094 stores in 25 countries. It employed 84,300 people. The brand had become a ritual. "Let's go to Blockbuster" was a sentence spoken in millions of American households every Friday evening, and the experience it described was the same from coast to coast. You walked through a glass door beneath a blue and yellow sign shaped like a torn ticket stub. The fluorescent lights hummed. The carpet was clean and commercial. To your left, the new releases wall, where the week's biggest titles faced outward in rows of identical cases, the cover art promising 2 hours of something you had been hearing about for months. To your right, the deep catalog organized by genre, thousands of titles stretching back years. The plastic cases clicked against each other as you slid them aside. At the back, the video games. Near the register, the candy, the popcorn, the faint smell of butter and plastic. You picked 2 or 3 movies for the family, argued about which one to watch first, and drove home. That was Friday night in America for the better part of 2 decades. But Antioco was not nostalgic. He was reading the numbers. Netflix had crossed 1 million subscribers by 2003. The trend was clear. In August of 2004, Blockbuster launched Blockbuster Online, its own DVD-by-mail subscription. Then Antioco went further. In late 2006, he introduced Total Access, a hybrid model no competitor could replicate. A Total Access subscriber received DVDs by mail, returned them to any Blockbuster store, and walked out with another title immediately. No waiting for the return trip through the postal system, no gap between movies. The 9,000 physical stores, the ones the analysts called a liability, became the advantage. It worked. By the first quarter of 2007, Total Access had more than 3 million subscribers. Netflix saw its growth slow. Its stock price dropped. The man who had struggled not to laugh in that Dallas conference room 7 years earlier was now spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build exactly what Netflix had offered to hand him for $50 million. But the spending terrified the balance sheet. Antioco had eliminated late fees in 2005, a decision that cost the company roughly $200 million in annual revenue and triggered a 48-state investigation over how the program was marketed. The combined weight of Total Access and the end of late fees was bleeding cash faster than subscribers were arriving. In early 2005, a man who understood balance sheets better than customers bought nearly 10 million shares of Blockbuster stock. His name was Carl Icahn. Icahn launched a proxy fight in 2005 and won 3 seats on the Blockbuster board, including one for himself. His argument was financial and, on its face, difficult to dismiss. Blockbuster was hemorrhaging money. Total Access was expensive. The end of late fees had cratered a revenue stream that once generated $800 million a year. Icahn wanted discipline. He wanted the bleeding stopped. He wanted Antioco's compensation reduced. You can read that decision 2 ways, and honest history holds both readings at once. From Icahn's seat, Blockbuster was a company burning through its reserves on an unproven online strategy with no clear path to profitability. From Antioco's seat, Total Access was winning, Netflix was rattled, and the investment needed time. The tragedy is that both men were reading the same spreadsheet and reaching opposite conclusions, and only one of them had the votes. Antioco left in early 2007 after a boardroom dispute over his compensation. In July of that year, the board named Jim Keyes, the former CEO of 7-Eleven, as his replacement. Keyes had run a convenience store chain. He understood foot traffic and point-of-sale margins. He did not understand what Antioco had been building, and he did not try to learn. Keyes scaled back total access. He raised prices on the online subscription. He told the press that Blockbuster's future was in its stores and that digital delivery was a niche business. The 3 million subscriber weapon was disarmed piece by piece. Netflix, given room to breathe, resumed its climb. Within 2 years, it had surpassed 10 million subscribers. Blockbuster's online numbers collapsed. The board had fired the general who was winning the war and replaced him with a man who did not believe the war existed. The numbers after 2007 tell the story without commentary. Revenue fell. Stores closed by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Employees were laid off in waves. Tens of thousands of workers who had staffed the registers, shelved the returns, and recommended movies to families on Friday evenings, let go with severance checks and the knowledge that the blue polo shirt they had worn was now a relic. The signs came down from strip malls across the country, leaving pale rectangular outlines on stucco walls where the sun had bleached the paint around them. On September 23, 2010, Blockbuster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with $900 million in debt. On April 6, 2011, Dish Network purchased what remained for $320 million, plus $87 million in assumed liabilities. A company Viacom had acquired for $8.4 billion, sold for roughly $320 million. That is less than what Blockbuster once collected in late fees in a single year. It is 6 times the amount Netflix had asked for in that Dallas conference room, paid not for a living company with a future, but for the carcass of a dead one. The corporate stores closed through 2013 and into 2014. The new releases walls were stripped bare. The carpet was pulled up. The spaces became nail salons and urgent care clinics and dollar stores, and the families who had once argued about what to rent on a Friday night drove past without looking. One franchise store remains. In Bend, Oregon, a single Blockbuster still operates under the management of Sandy Harding, who has kept the doors open through the bankruptcy, the liquidation, and the long disappearance of every other location on Earth. It still rents DVDs. The shelves still click. Tourists drive hours to photograph the sign. They post the pictures on platforms that did not exist when Blockbuster was at its peak, and they do it from phones that stream Netflix. Netflix, the company 3 men flew to Dallas to sell for $50 million, carries a market capitalization north of $300 billion. The $50 million Hastings asked for that afternoon would not cover a fraction of a single day of Netflix's current operations. The Blockbuster name still exists, technically, licensed to a brand management company that prints it on t-shirts and novelty candy. You can buy a replica membership card as a souvenir. You cannot use it to rent a movie. The Friday night ritual did not die. It moved to the couch. Millions of families still argue about what to watch. They scroll through a streaming menu instead of walking an aisle, and there is no due date and no late fee. Exactly the way Netflix promised from the beginning. The format changed. The habit endured. The company that once owned that habit did not. The corner of John Antiocho's mouth in that Dallas conference room has become one of the most retold moments in American business history. The smirk that cost an empire. But the fuller record tells a different story. Antiocho did take Netflix seriously. He built Blockbuster Online. He launched Total Access. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars on exactly the digital transition everyone now says Blockbuster ignored. He had 3 million subscribers and Netflix on its heels when a boardroom fight over his bonus gave Carl Icahn the leverage to replace him with a man who believed the future was a fad. Blockbuster did not die because it refused to change. Blockbuster changed, started winning, and then the board tore it down from the inside. If you ever held a Blockbuster membership card, walked those aisles on a Friday night, or stood behind that counter in the blue polo shirt, drop a comment and tell us which store, which city, and whether you still miss it. The people who rented from those shelves and the people who stocked them understand what was lost better than the investors who sold it for parts. You are watching Empire Circuit. If you want to understand how the biggest names in American technology and entertainment rose, ruled, and fell, subscribe and join the archive. We have the story of another American empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.